Hello, how are you?
We're doing great. I am going to, this is real quickly. If I can get through the day without having a hot mic moment, it's a successful day. So I'm going to toss it to you, Amy.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I also want to say thank you to Michelle Archie, who was the one who introduced us in the first place. I've enjoyed collaborating with you both, and I'm glad to be here with you in this capacity today. I also wish I was there in person. And so, yes, I live in Pittsburgh. I grew up about an hour outside of the city and in a fairly rural area. And a lot of my work is around the United States and parts of Canada that are rural as well. So I'm excited to talk to you. Pittsburgh's in a weird kind of place. We're not quite East Coast and we're not quite Midwest. We're just a little bit confused, I think. But I am going to go ahead and share my screen. And you should be seeing my presentation view. If not, somebody can let me know. So we have about a half an hour to talk a little bit about Trail Town's state of mind and how communities in Kansas can cultivate a trail culture. So I'm going to talk with you about the history and evolution of trail towns, what I consider to be some community best practices, and just share lots of good examples of how communities are doing a good job of connecting to their trails. And I will say I've had the opportunity to look at some of your program materials, and I saw the goals that you set out before starting the program. And I think a lot of you are on your way to cultivating a trail culture. The goals that you shared are very similar to the kinds of things I'm going to be talking about today. So with that, let's get started. Okay, so I wanted to start with an excerpt from a book that I wrote during the pandemic. This was my pandemic project, but it's a book about trail towns. And the reason I'm reading it is just, I think it will help to frame our conversation. So it's less than a page. And at this point, at the beginning of my book, I'm talking about the Great Allegheny Passage, which I will talk about a lot throughout the next half hour. And this is what I say. I couldn't believe it when a community leader in a small town along one of America's most noted trails announced, "That trail cost us more than it brings in." People who espouse such thinking contend that trails are more trouble than they're worth because they drain communities of their resources. I have to wonder how a trail that the National Geographic has called an American classic fails to gain the appreciation of local leadership. What's even more perplexing, though, is along this same trail, a mere 50 miles away, I've been told the opposite. Once years ago, I was doing some work along the trail when a crotchety-looking fellow shouted, "Are you with the trail?" I nodded yes and braced myself. Thankfully, I must have had misread his tone or body language, because when he got closer to me, he offered, "This trail is the best thing that's ever happened to this town." This contrast between two opposing perspectives along the very same ribbon of trail raises an important question about the value of trails. What's the reality? Are trails just time-sapping money drains, or are they the best thing since sliced bread? So what is the reality? I have to think that probably every single person in this room today thinks the latter, that their trail and trails in general are the best. And I agree, I wouldn't be here if so. But there is some of that other thinking that we have to contend with as we do our work. But I believe very strongly, and there's a lot of evidence to demonstrate that investing in trails contributes to more vibrant, more delightful, visitor-ready communities. So that's one of my takeaways that I hope that you will take from this conversation, and that I think that you already know. And a visitor-ready community, by the way, to me is not for the visitors. That's just a side benefit. Really, a visitor-ready community is one that also is likely to be quite enjoyable and pleasant for local residents as well. And the other takeaway that I hope that you'll get from this conversation is that Trail Towns is a model to help guide that investment in communities. So I want to just give you a real quick and dirty definition of what it means to be a trail town, and then we'll get back to defining it a little bit more specifically later. But somebody said to me a few years ago, I think I was in Illinois, and she said to be a trail town is to make the decision to pay attention to trails. And that's actually how I ended up calling my book Deciding on Trails, because it is a decision that every community faces, whether to make that investment in trails, whether to celebrate them, whether to carry an attitude that is trail positive. And it's a decision. And to me, that's what it means really to be a trail community or to be a trail town. Now, over the next section, I'm going to be talking to you about a formal organized approach called trail towns. That's an opportunity for communities to do a formal program. But whether you have a program or not in your community, there are opportunities to become more trail connecting, more trail friendly, more celebratory of trails. And that's one of the main things I want you to know today, is that it's an attitude, it's a state of mind, it's a way of thinking about trails and the people who are using them. So as for the history and evolution of trail towns, like Elizabeth said, I guess I was in the right place at the right time in 2007. Whenever the Trail Town program along the Great Allegheny Passage was created, I was one of the first staff for that program and worked there for about 5 years. But there's some history as to how that program was created. It comes from a place of pain and frustration. The woman who was the visionary of the Great Allegheny Passage and who headed up the Great Allegheny Passage Conservancy had a study commissioned in the early 2000s, and the economic results were a bit disappointing. And she realized, Linda Box, that there were missed opportunities in some of these rural post-industrial communities located along the gap. I'm going to call the Great Allegheny Passage the gap. And so she knew that there was missed opportunity, that the communities weren't connecting in the way that they could, that they didn't get trail users, and that there was just more opportunity. So she worked with a statewide organization and with our state agencies to develop this concept called trail towns. And it was a proactive way for communities to better connect to trails. And so this is the logo for that program. And again, it was started in 2007. And even though the Great Allegheny Passage Conservancy created the program and conceived it, it was housed in an organization called the Progress Fund, which was my employer at the time. And the Progress Fund is a community development financial institution. And what that means, if you're not familiar with CDFIs, is that it's like a bank, but it's not a bank. It's a nonprofit that has a loan pool and the ability to make loans to small businesses. And so they saw the benefit of creating this program that was intended to help communities better connect to trails, recreation, hospitality, and tourism. And they had the loan pool to help to support businesses in some of those communities along the trail. That's just a little bit of the background on the resources, but I want to show you what the trail looks like. So if you're looking at this map, starting in the top left corner, Pittsburgh is one of the terminuses of the gap, and the trail goes from Pittsburgh to Cumberland, Maryland. That's 150 miles. It's a rail trail, considered a multi-use trail. And 150 miles is significant. That's what a lot of people would consider a destination trail. And in Cumberland, it connects to the C&O Canal Towpath, which carries on to Washington, D.C. So there's more than 300 miles of dedicated trail between these two systems. And, they do connect two cities, but along the way, you have a lot of rural post-industrial communities. And, our job at the time was to help those communities to better benefit from the trail. I wanted to say that program was inspired by Main Street. I can see you. So how about a show of hands? How many of you are familiar with the Main Street program? Okay, I can't see as well as I thought I did, but I think I saw a fair number of hands go up. And so if you're familiar with Main Street, you know, the idea is to help communities, traditional downtown areas, to revitalize. And so the Trail Town program was taking that same concept of helping downtown areas in rural communities to improve, and the trail was the asset that was connecting them all. We considered the program to be a regional approach to rural economic development. We were very highly focused on economic development. We were looking at job creation and new businesses and business expansions, and hotel tax dollars. Those were our measures. Those were the things that we were thinking about with the program. And I wanted to share with you some economic impact figures. I mentioned that disappointing economic study in the early 2000s. That's the first figure you see here, that's $7.2 million. Now that's across an entire 3-county region, so it's not as much as, you know, had been hoped for. By the time that the Trail Town program had been created and the trail was, you know, better marketed, better known, it was, you know, closer to completion in 2008, the number had jumped up to $40 million. The next measure had it at $50 million. And then by 2019, whenever the Gap Conservancy did another study, they found a direct annual impact of $74.7 billion. So as you can see, that's about 10 times what it was, what was that, 17 years previous. So I want to pause for a second. I was talking with Michelle a few weeks ago, and she said something to the effect of, you know, we measure that, those things that we care about. And, you know, we were very heavily focused on the economic piece. That was what we were measuring. And I think that that made sense for us at the time. I mean, for so many years, trail advocates had been put into a position of having to prove the value of trails. And one of the ways that you reach your decision makers and your elected officials, your grant officers, is by demonstrating economic value. And so we were very much focused in that direction. But there are a lot of other benefits of trails, and I know that you've covered this in your program. And I found myself over time finding that we needed to sort of like correct the course and to start to think about trails a little bit more broadly again. And so, like I said, I was looking at your materials and I saw something in all of your syllabus about quick hits. I was just noticing your materials and I saw this quick hit thing. So I have a quick hit for you, which is just to take a little bit of a dive into this topic. So the slide you're looking at, just go ahead and blurt it out. What is the phrase that's not complete here? Don't put all of your eggs in one basket. Yes. So to me, the one basket that I think a lot of trail advocates had been focusing on over time was that of economic impact and economic value. And that's important. It's really highly important. But I think that it's an incomplete promise when we're talking about trails. Another thing that Michelle had said is that job creation and economic benefit can't be the only part of your trail's value proposition, because what happens if we do that? First of all, not all trails are long distance destination trails that are economic generators. A lot of your trails I know are community trails. We can't be thinking only about the economic piece. The overemphasis on any one benefit can be detrimental. The image here is of one of the most famous and most viewed TED Talks of all time. It's called The Danger of a Single Story. She's not talking about trails in her presentation, but I want to encourage you to check that out and for you to remember, you know, that we can't get stuck on any one benefit. I mean, when we're talking about trails, we're talking about a lot of things. We're promising experiences and memories, sense of place, connection and belonging, health and wellness, routes and access, community vibrancy, that's you know, includes in part that economic piece, and fun. anytime I do a survey of trail users and there's a question that asks people, what is the main reason you're using the trail? They're going to tell you that it's either, for exercise, health and wellness, or for fun. So a lot of different things we're promising in trails, and I just wanted to take a minute to talk about that. So to me, the story of trail towns becomes a lot more interesting whenever entities from other places along different trails saw what we were doing on the Gap and decided to take that model for trail towns and to adapt it and to make it their own. And what happened with that adaptation is sort of a de-emphasis of the economic, and it became just a more holistic look at how trails and communities can better connect. It started with the Appalachian Trail. The Appalachian Trail Conservancy created a program. So suddenly something that we had created for a 150-mile rail trail, they were using for a 2,200-mile footpath. They have, I think, about 50 communities across 12 or 13 states. And so some of the other national scenic trails saw what they were doing and adapted from there. The North Country Trail was one of them, the Continental Divide Trail, and all sorts of different entities and trails took the model and made it their own. And a few years ago, even, or longer than that now, we ended up with a statewide program. Kentucky did the first state-operated trail town program. So all of the programs up until then were based on a single trail and helping communities along that trail to buy into a program. But Kentucky said, oh no, we're going to operate this out of our Office of Adventure Tourism, and we're going to, allow communities throughout the state to have a chance to be recognized as trail towns. A few years ago, Michigan did the same thing. So did Florida. So the marks that you see here are just for a handful of some of the earlier programs and more influential programs, but there are probably, I don't know, there are well over a dozen programs out there. There's a Trail Town presence in at least 28 states, as well as the province of Ontario. I worked with a group there to create a program that was based on a waterway. So it's not always land trails, sometimes it's water trails and other types of resources. And if I were to estimate for you, I think there are probably well over 300 communities around the country that have some sort of a formal trail town program going on. So there's sort of like an informal piece of trail towns too. Like I said, you don't need a formal program to do a lot of the right things. And one of the things that I noticed over time was an increase of trail town mentions on Instagram. And this is just another kind of measure, right? And so I looked back in Instagram, and it was first used in 2013. And there were 5 uses of the Trail Town hashtag. Now I follow that hashtag and I get, a handful of posts every single day that I'm alerted to. And the Trail Town hashtag has now been used over 4,000 times. Something that really surprised me, if you look down to the bottom there, I did a search yesterday for trail community, and that's been used over 14,000 times. So that blew me away. I was quite surprised by that. And I think a lot of that is people who are creating community with each other. A lot of runners use that tag because they feel a sense of community with their fellow runners. But just another way to think about trail towns. As for the definition, this is the best one, in my opinion. A trail town is a community through which a trail passes that supports trail users with services, promotes the trail to its residents, and embraces the trail as a resource to be protected and celebrated. If you break that down, I love every piece of that. It's providing the right services to visitors. It's making note of residents and connecting residents to the trail. And I really like the piece about protecting and celebrating the trail. It's not transactional, it's more transformative. It's thinking about the trail, not just as an economic cash cow. I love this definition. I also use this pyramid. I used to think of trail towns as being a community along a trail that embraces the trail in some way, that there's some kind of an trail economy in place. But I'm really focused on this bottom row of this pyramid. To me, to be a trail town, whether you have an organized program or not, The trail needs to be an integral part of your community identity, going back to that idea of an attitude, a state of mind, and celebrating and investing in trails. So I talk a lot about trail supportive businesses, trail supportive communities, and that got me thinking about progression from this idea of support to getting more of a place of enthusiasm, and going from enthusiasm to community-wide investment, and investment leads to vibrancy. So I just wanted to share a visual for that. It's more than a brand, it's more than a program, it's more than being transactional. And I also want to say, I think there's enough for everybody. I think there's a way for communities and for lots of communities to benefit from trails. And you can take these ideas for enthusiasm and investment and even take them off trails. You know, we have lots of valuable resources in our communities. We have libraries and parks and other communities that could benefit from the same line of thinking. So I want to share some best practices now. Going back to the book, the way that I organized it was I shared a lot of the history and evolution of trail towns, some of the ways that programs work and operated. But then in the center of the book, I get into what I consider to be best practices of healthy communities. And these are the 7 best practices. One is to adopt a shared vision. You have to start from a place of vision and a place of values. 2 is to physically connect trail to town. I think this is what a lot of people often think about when they're thinking about trail towns. You're thinking about amenities and infrastructure to safely move people between the trail and the town, getting visitors in and getting your local residents out to the trail. Extending an invitation is all about hospitality and making people feel welcome, and how we do those things through our physical signs and messaging. Lots of physical cues can be offered to people to make them feel welcome, as well as, you know, different ways of approaching hospitality. I'm going to talk more about trail culture, so I'm going to skip over that for now. Knowing your market, understanding your trail and who's using it and who could be. Sharing your story. I know you spent a couple of sessions focused on sharing your story, which I was very excited about, but you know, it's a competitive marketplace in trails. Even if you're only thinking about rail trails, there are more than 2,000 rail trails in the United States, right? People have a lot of trails from which to choose. And so you have to be able to communicate the story of your trail and your community, and why they should choose yours and use yours. And you have to communicate that to residents as well. And that leads into the 7th practice, which is committing to quality trails. Again, if there are a lot of trails out there, if there are trails that are not cared for and may feel less safe, I'm not going to use that one, right? So quality trails connects to this, all of this, it all connects together. So the image here is of the High Trestle Trail Bridge in Iowa. This trail is about 24 miles long, and they needed to span the Des Moines River Valley. And whenever they created this trail bridge, they didn't just do a bridge, which would have been enough. It's a really beautiful river valley, you know, that would stand on its own as an attraction, but they decided to create an epic work of art. And it connects back to community heritage. If you see the arches there, those are to mimic the cribbings of a coal mine, which is a part of their, you know, local heritage. So there's a lot of story here. There's an invitation, there's an investment. A lot of the best practices show up in this one bridge. And so this is a town on the trail, Madrid, Iowa. Can you see what's happening here with this wayfinding sign? The diamond at the top is mimicking the arches on the bridge. So sometimes it's the little things that indicate, you know, a celebration of trails or a trail culture. So with that, I want to talk a little bit about trail culture. I consider it to be the bedrock best practice, and that it shows up in a lot of those other best practices. So I have some examples from Along the Gap. This is the fun show and tell part with just lots of pictures. So art is big. These sculptures in Frostburg, Maryland are really, it's hard for people for Frostburg to draw people into town because it's about a mile up the mountain from the trail. It's a tough sell for people using a rail trail. So they created these switchbacks to ease the way a little bit, and these great, bike themed sculptures to draw people up from the trail. The image on the right is just a repurposed bike that was used as part of a program called Bananas for Bikes. I worked in the town of Connellsville last year on a project. I was helping them do some placemaking efforts to just better connect to the trail, better celebrate it. The Great Allegheny Passage goes right through downtown Connellsville, but there were some missed opportunities there. So one of the things we did was we created this bike exhibit. The bike shop had all of these great banana seat bikes and in the front window and their display case, and we decided, okay, well let's do a vintage bike exhibit and have bikes all over town. And we called it Bananas for Bikes, and we had, I think, 30 bikes in 20 different locations. Going back to this one, the garden club got involved. We had, I think, 5 or 6 repurposed bikes in community gardens around town. So, this is a great example of a lot of different people and organizations coming together in a small town to do something that made a difference for that town last summer. We also did a lot of sidewalk chalk. I'll get to that in the next slide. But, we were sort of like, we had the people doing the chalk messaging, let people know about the bike exhibit. The gentleman here is Demetrius Morgan. He was our young college student artist, and he doesn't live in Connellsville, but he came to visit because he wanted to see the exhibit and he wanted to see his work. He wanted to see his art in the windows. So I love that story. Another one is Spotto's Hardware here. I had a sign made up for them. I knew they'd have this yellow racer bike in the window, and then I got to town and they had 3 bikes in the window. So we hurried up and had to make more signs, but I love the sense of enthusiasm for something like this. And one of the things I want to impress on you about trail towns and becoming more trail friendly is a lot of this is fun and easy work. Some of it takes a lot of planning and investment, but some of it can be done, pretty easily, and can be great ways of building community for you locally. One of the things we did with the bike exhibit was we did a guided walking tour one day. Easy enough, right? But we got people out together and moving around. Here with this sandwich sign and with this other one, free bottled water for thirsty bikers and hikers. This trail culture starts to show up in a lot of different ways. It shows up in the events that you plan. It shows up in signs and sandwich boards on sidewalks, and sidewalk chalk. So this was a very affordable project for us. We paid a high school artist who did the globe image, and she would go out once a month and do a really nice temporary art installment. And then on the weekends, we had another local resident just go out with her family and do these fun, whimsical type messages. Another way that trail culture shows up, restaurant menus, right? Things that small businesses are doing to better connect to the trail and to say, hey, we see the trail, we value it, we get it, and we're going to work it into our business. This is Champaign, Illinois, the Kickapoo Rail Trail, which is also another, I think, about 24-mile trail. And they're really like, they bring the culture, their local culture, into what they do with their trail. It's an agricultural area. So this picture has an interpretive sign interpreting the grain silo. And they do this really cool thing in their parks. They put out these minions all around their parks in the spring, and families go out and look for them. So people who might not otherwise think to go to parks or trails do it because, the people along the Kickapoo and working with this park system, they meet people where they are. This is also along the Kickapoo. So you have this business in a major city that is telling people, follow the trail all the way to the wheelhouse. And you get to the wheelhouse, which is a small town of fewer than 1,000 residents. And this is what you see right along the trail, a restaurant. And you start to understand why they called it the wheelhouse. They just have bikes all over the place. But this is trail culture, people. That's what it is. And, a lot of times it's easy. I call it put a bike on it. You put a bike in the storefront, or you hang a bike from the building. Or if your trail is not focused on bikes, maybe it's a kayak or a canoe or some other kind of a symbol. So what does trail culture look like, and cultivating a trail culture? I think it's a few different things. When things are really working well, trails show up in your municipal plans. They show up in your budgets and your policies. That's whenever you know your elected officials value trails and are investing in them. I just mentioned putting a bike on it. You also start to see trails and cycles and trail symbols on menus and merchandising, and visitor packages and visitor itineraries, and activating trails and programming them, hosting events and activities that will get people out there. I'm going to speak to that in just a moment, but that's one of the ways that you start to see trail culture is you see activity, you see trail use, and you use them personally as well, right? So this is where you start to see it as local people feeling good about trails and using them and inviting other folks out to use them as well. So I wanted to just mention that activating trails does jumpstart trail culture, right? Why wouldn't it? Whenever you're getting people out there. And I know Michelle is going to talk next about data, and I just thought this was interesting and worth sharing. I'm working on a project in Ohio right now, and we did a survey that was taken by more than 1,000 people across 4 communities. They're thinking about starting a Trail Town program. And what we found was people who took the survey who said they never used the trail were obviously less trail positive in their thinking. But this first stat is the most important one. 75% of respondents overall in those communities already perceive their community to be a trail town. They think of their town in that way. But just 42% of those that never use the trails think the same thing. So the reason I shared this is there's a drastic difference there, and understanding that getting people onto trails using them is sometimes the first step in getting longer term trail support. So just to wrap up here, why does any of this matter? I want to take it back to health and wellness. I know that's important to the Sunflower Foundation and to all of us. I want to talk to you at a human level about health and wellness and nature. 49% of the United States population ages 6 and over participated in outdoor activities in 2017. That's only half of us went outside and did things in the outdoors. So there's a lot of room for growth and getting people outside enjoying the benefits of nature. I don't think I have to tell you, but we experience all sorts of personal, physical health and wellness benefits: reduced blood pressure, decreased stress, higher energy levels, increased creativity, lots of benefits to being out there besides just that feeling of benefit of enjoying the outdoors. It makes us more creative. The stress hormone cortisol is decreased whenever we're outside taking a walk. So there's a lot of reason to be out there. And one of the things I wanted to share is just this explosion in nature prescription programs. They have park prescriptions, trail prescriptions, and you can see how many there was one in 2006. By 2018, there were 17 of them. They're all over the country, and it's a way that doctors can literally prescribe time spent outside in nature. And we know from research how much time we need to be out there. There's research that suggests we need to be out there about 2 hours a week. That's how much time we need to reap the health and wellness benefits of being outside. And so now there's even a park prescription program in Canada that is prescribing 2 hours. They're connecting that research back to their program and saying, hey, go spend 2 hours outside this week. So on a human level, that, this is about wellness, and it's about vitality. And those of us that are also thinking about the trail economy, you need a trail culture, one that to be able to uphold a trail economy. You really need that culture of trails to make the economy stick. And then the last thing I just wanted to share here is again, that investing in trails contributes to more vibrant, more delightful, more visitor-ready communities. I've seen it all over the country. I know that you've seen it in Kansas, and I am glad that you are doing the work that you're doing, and I celebrate you for it. I hope we can connect. I like to, one of the reasons I do this work is to build community. If you could check out my website, it's cycleforward.org. I keep a blog there and would love to stay in touch with you. So that's what I've got. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy. I don't know about the rest of you, but my mind is going boo, boo, boo with ideas, right? So let's give her a hand. And we
Thank
do
you.
have time for questions. Brett and Gabby will be circulating with mics. So you have a choice. You can either hold up your Zoom question if you have an index card, if you want us to read it off, or they'll bring it to me and I'll read it to Amy, or you can just bellow into the mic. But we do need to use the mic so that Amy can hear you. So I've got a gazillion questions, but I'll hold off. So I'd like to open the floor to any questions. All right. Well, okay. So we've got a couple of Zoom ones for you, Amy. How important is it to have a statewide trail organization and hold annual trail conferences or events to celebrate trails? What states, if so, what states would be a good model for Kansas?
That's a good question. Honestly, some of the statewide efforts that I'm familiar with involves the state agency bringing people together. In Pennsylvania, we have a Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, which holds statewide trail conferences. And, I know there are other states that are similar. I'm sort of drawing a blank on nonprofit run agents, statewide trail efforts, but Elizabeth, I can get back to you with any that I think of. But I think it's highly important to have a statewide communication system and network of people working together and connecting. Absolutely important for sharing information and commiserating together sometimes, celebrating together, sharing resources. That's always one of the best values of any Trails Coalition that I've been involved in any statewide effort.
Great. And I've got a couple more questions, but I want to slip mine in there and I won't make you go back on your slides. But did you all notice the slide where she showed the map of the US in the dark green states that were trail town states? And did you all see that big swath of gray in the middle where there ain't nothing happening, as we say in Oklahoma? I know I've asked you this before, Amy. Why is that big gap in the middle in the Midwest?
Well,
yeah, we can take the truth.
Now, I think, well, first of all, Trail Town started with rail trails, and there are a lot of abandoned rail corridors in some of the states that you did see, Pennsylvania, Maryland, some of the other states that were marked green. So I do know you have rail trails and abandoned corridors as well, but the amount of the abandoned corridors varies throughout the country. Another thing is, it's a program that people learn about, maybe because they have access to information about something happening a state or two over. So, I think if you went back over time and filled in that map, like you would see a lot of that proximity, right? Programs being created with states that are close to each other. And then one last thing I would say, the Appalachian Trail goes through, I think, 12 states. So you just tick 12 states off right away just because of that one system. So some of the longer trails that are out there, cover multiple states. And, I just think in your part of the country, there's just not anything yet that I'm familiar with in terms of a formal program being created, which is an opportunity.
Yes, I know when we talked, you said, look at that big gap, that gray spot as an opportunity. And we certainly can, especially with our Flint Hills Trail, which is 117 miles. And I think this question might relate to that a little bit is, how do you best connect communities with perhaps are all adjacent to a rail trail, so they have a similar interest in this trail, but they have no prior connection to each other or to working with each other. How did the gap connect the communities along that maybe hadn't really talked to each other before? What did it take?
Yeah. So the thing about rail trails is railroads don't have a history of connecting, right? They have a history of extracting and taking away. And trails are different, right? Trail users, if you remember, trail users who are doing a longer trek going through multiple communities, they're not thinking about municipal lines. They're thinking about their needs for the day and the trail experience that they're trying to create. And I think, if you have your business community starting to understand that, your trail serving businesses, that those municipal lines start to fall away a little bit. So I think having your businesses understand and to help with that messaging and to stop thinking so much, in terms of municipal lines, that helps. It helps that we had a formal program and that some of the other efforts out there have formal programs that have a regional staff to bring communities together. When we did our program on the Gap, we had summits like the one that you have right now, where we bring people together to learn and to share, and that made a big difference as well. So those are some of the things that make a difference, I think.
So bringing people together, just like we're doing today. We have time for one more question, and I've got one on this card, but does anyone in the audience have a question that they feel brave enough to yell out? Okay. Then I'm going to ask, and this question goes a little deep, a little meta for early in the morning, but it says, I noticed you're showing a lot of art in your photos. And this is good because we actually have the Kansas Creative Arts Commission representative here today. So the question is, you're showing a lot of art in your photos. It's hard enough to quantify the monetary value of art. How do we do that and trails at the same time? So I think what they're getting at is, already, how do we, and how are you able to say it's not enough to have a trail? Now we need to spend money to have art on the trail. How do we quantify that?
Yeah.
I warned you, it was deep.
So I mentioned in my presentation that this isn't just about trails, right? There's enough room with this way of thinking about communities to think about libraries and parks and art and all sorts of different community amenities, right? I would never want any of your communities to have the blinders on and just be thinking about being a trail community, being a trail town, because a vibrant community, the kinds of places where people want to live and visit, regardless of political affiliation, regardless of urban, suburban, rural, are places that have art and trails and access to nature and all of the things, right? So we have to make space for thinking about these assets together. I don't know if I have the answer about quantifying, but remember I said that it's a competitive marketplace in trails. And if you are trying to attract people out to your trails, art can make a really significant difference, especially whenever it's very well done. Have you ever seen that there are trails that are lit by night with cool art? And the High Trestle Trail Bridge that I showed you, they light the arches at night, so it becomes a destination. That's a piece of art, and it expands the hours of the day that people are visiting that trail. So it can be considered an investment. And the last thing I would say is, if you watch CBS Sunday Morning, they did a really nice special about Bentonville, Arkansas last weekend. And I think a lot of people know the Bentonville Trail story, but there was a segment about art there, and the blending of trails and art, and I think you might want to check that out. One other thing, Michelle is in the chat, and whenever we were talking about statewide trails coalitions, she mentioned the Oregon Trails Coalition, so I just wanted to mention that as another statewide resource to check out.
Fantastic. Thank you for all the recommendations. And let's all wave goodbye to Amy, and thank you so much. I know we'll be talking again. We really appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.